Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And it is that time of the week. Yes, we have reached episode 33 of my series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork. And today I had the opportunity to take a little jaunt through the world, or at least a world inspired by one of the sci-fi greats. I am talking about none other than Mr. Isaac Asimov. So I read this book when I was very young, and it really inspired me. It gave me a little bit more of a utopian vibe as opposed to a dystopian vibe when it comes to science fiction. I know dystopia is all the rage, and I love it too. I can see the appeal. And while definitely Asimov's works went into that realm where there was, robots uprising, he also did capture a lot of these really beautiful moments between humans and robots and what the implications were of just the creation of robots. So I do not possess the incomparable chops of Mr. Asimov. So when you hear this story or when you read it, keep that in mind, that this is just a little homage to one of my favorite science fiction authors of all time. And I do not stand on the shoulder of a giant. I am futilely trying to climb my way up to his ankle, maybe. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the music I listened to, or the soundtrack of the story. I almost went with Moon by Clint Mansell, but I feel like it was a little, as much as I love that soundtrack, it got a little bit too epic, and I don't think it would have been a great fit for this one. Um, Once you see the artwork, you'll know it seems to be a quiet moment, or a reflective moment between a robot and a woman. And so I went with an electronic artist that I haven't listened to in some time. Luvian, he goes by, and this is his latest release called Verga 1. It was a great accompaniment to it. It's melodic, it's a little bit ambient as well, and I think it put me in the right headspace, despite the fact that this was probably one of the most challenging stories that I've written in this series. So without further ado, let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Distant Dream, and it is by a freelance illustrator named Zizao Chen from Chengdu, China. What caught my eye about this one was the Asimovian look to it. Now, I know we tend to think about robots and AIs as being out to destroy us, but there's something that just felt very retro about this. It reminded me of an Isaac Asimov cover. And the design of the robot here, as well as the juxtaposition of the woman in the background with the horse. And I love how her head is out of frame in the composition, telling me that this woman and this horse is a dream of this robot. And I really like that implication. iRobot is one of my favorite collections of Asimov's, and I thought, since most of the things I've done so far have been darker, more bleak, hopeless, etc., etc., it might be interesting to try creating a story about a robot that maybe isn't so bad. Although, considering he's on his knees, looks completely defeated, I have a feeling that it's going to go that direction, at least in part. So Zizao Chen, thank you for this artwork. I love the callback. You don't really see much of this anymore, so it's great to see some contemporary artists tackling this kind of subject matter. All right, let's see what I came up with. Almond scanned a horizon bereft of jagged lines and clusters of buildings, looking for hoofprints. There were none. He took in the view from atop a dune, noting the plump foliage that spread across it. Pieces of emerald candy. It's yummy. Almond turned in response to the phrase. An echo. They'd been happening more lately. This one was always in the corner of his memory's eye, an expression he'd gleaned from an implanted series of frequencies, not a person. There were no more of those. He would have found some by now. His journey had been long. Wind hit him, stirring sand around his legs and up his body to reach his exposed neck. The grains trickled inside. If he turned his head just right, it almost sounded like a voice. The ocean was blue because the sky was blue. Another implant sprung into existence. Eyes, one blue, one gray. A most unusual combination. Pixels converged, shifted, colorized. She had black hair with a hint of red. "You can't eat it," Almond said, looking at the ice plants. He had recalled their description. "Why not?" she said. "They're called ice plants." He could not retrieve the answer. "Don't be afraid," she said, and took his hand, urging him down the dune. "I do not have the ability to fear," he said. A gull perched on Almond's foot, his hand empty of the girl's, the beach empty of her. He went to greet the bird, and it glided away to join the others gathered at the place where the ocean folded over to become thin and foamy, leaving behind a reflection. "I thought you weren't afraid," she said. "They're just waves." Waves. The birds appeared frightened of them. Perhaps it might make them flat like the sand. And that is what they feared. He hadn't had the opportunity to touch a gull, but he hypothesized they weren't malleable. She twirled on the reflective sand. Her white dress was too big for her, so it collected mud and water at the hem. "It's easier to walk here. Come on, Almond." "That is not my descriptor." "A number isn't a name, and I gave you a good one." "It's too short to be of any significance. There aren't enough combinations to make a quality identifier." She threw a clump of sand at him. He walked toward her, noting the difficulty. The sand changed shape when his ankle registered the proper rotation for equilibrium. He would have asked her why if she would have been there. The color was different now, the sun in a different location. From here he could see no hoofprints. Why was he looking for hoofprints? He had never questioned a directive before. Curious. He was sure the answer would become clear when he found them. At least he had an image or a representation. "Like this," she said, presenting a canvas. It depicted a mammal with 4 legs, hooves, a billowing mane running down its neck, twinned by the one on its tail. "I understand." She was taller now. The hem of her dress didn't reach the ground. She collapsed the easel and returned to where it was dry, beside Almond. She gathered her dress around her legs and sat. "I see you're still afraid." Almond had already told her he didn't have the ability for that emotion, so he didn't repeat himself. "There aren't any more, you know," she said. "There used to be so many. When I was young, I was able to ride one once. On the beach like this. Dad had said it was expensive and would be my birthday gift for the next 20 years. She smiled and traced her finger in the sand. "See, this kind is no fun. It doesn't have a memory." Almond knew sand was incapable of information storage, but she would be displeased if he corrected her. Her posture and expression told him she was in a good state of mind. The slow pulse at her neck. She leaped to her feet and held out her hand. "Come on!" He took it as instructed. When she pulled, however, he did not move. "Almond?" she said. "Have you ever wondered why I named you that?" He had run through all the permutations before her lips completed the phrase. There was no logical answer. "It's silly, but I was a kid." Almond, short for almost man? Strange. He had not reached that conclusion through his calculations. "Told you it was a good one." She pulled him toward the water. A wave flattened a short distance away, thinning to a transparent sheet netted with foam. It stopped just before his toes and retreated back to sea. His foot displaced the sand slightly, but it indeed positioned his joints at a sufficient angle. He tried his other foot. She was, indeed, correct. "Told you," she said with a smile and a wink. She danced closer to the water, saw something there, and dropped to her knees with excitement. "Hurry!" she said, waving him over. "I haven't seen one of these since that day." Almond studied the creature. A flat shell with short spines and a long protrusion he supposed might be a tail of some kind. "A horseshoe crab," she said. "Their hoof prints look like this. Horses." She blushed. "Of course you knew that." Almond did not, but he agreed that the description was accurate. "A good name," he said. She chuckled, looked at him, smiled. "It is." The water reached them. She yelped, but stayed where she was, leaning into him. When the water receded, the crab was gone. She was gone. Almond was left alone, looking at his reflection, bubbling with foam, and then even that disappeared. He held his head low, eyes to the sand, waiting for the crab to resurface, waiting for her to come back. When neither of them did, Almond got to his feet and continued his search for hoofprints, wondering when he'd see her again. This one was quite intimidating for me. I don't know why. I think because I love Isaac Asimov's work so much that getting in that realm or remotely in that realm, I think was going to be a challenge. I've just always loved what he's done with robots in a positive light, and that's what I was trying to do here. I wasn't trying to tell a story of AI or robotic revenge or destruction. I just wanted to tell a story about a girl and a robot, reminiscent of I, Robot. It's a great story collection. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly suggest you do. The first thing I had to do was figure out a name, and Almond came to mind immediately. Sometimes coming up with meaningful names is really difficult for me, but for whatever reason, it worked. And maybe it's stupid, but Almond, almost man, as you now know. That is what I went with. And I knew right away that I wanted to keep this entirely on the beach. I didn't want to stray too far from this, what you're looking at right now. And what I really liked about this image, and I mentioned that when I was talking about the artwork, is the fact that you don't see this girl. Her identity is withheld from the viewer. And what's great about that from a storytelling perspective, and I don't know if this was the intention of the artist or not, but it's a fragment. It's not the entire thing, and I love how the robot has his or its back to her, which is, I took it as the memory. So she and the horse are the memory. And so that was what I was trying to do, is create a story between these two people. Well, robot and person. And so what I was doing is I was putting the robot on the beach, and I had an idea where I wanted this robot to be recalling things. And, it's pretty obvious from the title, Distant Memory, that that's what this is going to be. And because of all the facts I just stated about how her head is removed and she's behind him as if, symbolic of the fact that she is an actual memory. And so here I was playing with, what his name was, how he got his name. I really love the conversations between, well, not that they've ever happened, but when they've happened in fiction, I love the interactions between robots and children. And so what I was trying to create is a situation where we knew, or this robot grew up. Well, not grew up. This girl grew up with this robot. So here she's a little girl, and they're having a conversation, and he's being ultra logical as robots or androids are, and at least in my mind. And she's firing back with, like he's saying a number is far more. There's more specificity to numbers than there are letters, because there's an infinite number of numbers. But anyway, they're going back and forth about that. And what I was trying to do as well is get him toward the water. So I had him start on the dunes. I wanted to get him to this spot. I already decided pretty quickly that this is where it's going to end. Or actually, this is where it was going to end, but then it was also kind of a representation of the entire story. So, as you know, because you've already heard me read it, that this is the final position that he's in before he gets up and walks away. Even though the girl is not shown, she's gone. And that's really what I wanted to try to do, is create a sense of, well, at first I was kind of worried that the reader, like, okay, how do I communicate the fact that these are just memories that are kind of popping in and out of his head, right? It's almost as if he's been walking this beach or this world for a very, very long time. Humans are gone, and that's what I was trying to do, is create that kind of story, is that a very tragic story of this poor robot who has no companion, and he's searching for hoof prints because it's the last thing he had a conversation with this girl about. So that's what I was trying to do. I didn't want to like have him journey across the world and have big time jumps. I wanted it to be short, and I wanted the time jumps to be in his memory. And so that's what I was struggling with, is how do I communicate that? And then it really hit me toward the end about, well, why don't I just make it confusing, right? Why don't I just put the reader in the head of the robot, meaning she's popping into and out of existence. She starts young, and then I describe that she's older at one point, right? So the way I do that is, when I talk about the hem of her dress touching the wet sand and getting muddy and wet, and then later on, it fits her. So that was a subtle cue as to the passage of time, at least inside his brain or chip or whatever. That was it. That's all I gave the reader. So I'm sure it was somewhat confusing, but that was the goal. And I know that's weird to say, and I've said it in the past that the number one goal of a writer is communication to a reader. But I think in this case that it was appropriate because you're dealing with damaged goods, you're dealing with a distant memory, you're dealing with a robot or an android, however you want to describe them, with memory that is unreliable. They're just getting these snippets of data, kind of lost in the. No, I'm not going to say it. I don't need a pun, but lost in time. And actually, this one took me, I think this might have been the longest story it's ever taken. And it was funny because I thought it was going to be quick. I immediately had this concept. Thankfully, the artist had a great title that kind of steered me in the right direction, because otherwise, I don't know that I would have thought that this robot is dreaming about this girl, right? But because of the title, that really helped me. And then the image and just the powerful composition and the staging of the characters really led me along the right way. And so what I started to do in the story, if you're reading it as I'm writing it right here, is that I tried to, I don't know, I was playing with, okay, well, where do I start with? What's the conversation? And I start with her talking about his name, and then I start going down this path of, well, he's trying to find her a horse because she wants one, and she never got a horse, so that's sort of his duty, is to fulfill her dream by finding a horse, and that was the premise of why he's looking for hoof prints. But then it changed. I simplified it. It was really just about a conversation that he had with a girl that he was, I don't know, bonded with, or maybe he was some kind of service droid, companion droid. I have no idea, but that's where it went. And I really like the way it went, as opposed to her asking for a horse and then him, never being able to get one. And maybe that's why he was looking for hoof prints. Now that I'm thinking out loud and speaking here, I think that still could have worked. I think that could have been powerful, because the irony there is that just because first of all, he's never going to find hoof prints if it's the end of the world and there's nothing left. And it just shows the ignorance and almost the childlike nature that something as advanced as an android can have. Because I feel like, and I'm not a futurist or anything like that, so I have no education or really any just general knowledge about how artificial intelligence works, or what's going to happen first, if it's going to be information or emotion. And I just feel like information is the logical way to go, meaning that we want these things to be functional. We're not trying to replicate humans. We're trying to create people, or not people, but things to solve our problems. And that's how it's always been. I mean, that's a pretty classic trope, where we have these robots just completely logical. There's no emotion to them. They don't understand. Even though I did add a little joke, and I don't know if you caught it at the end, but when he said it's a good name when they're talking about the horseshoe, and that was sort of an unintended joke on his part, because she laughed and said it is, referencing back to when she was arguing with him that she had given him a good name. And so I think that's a great opportunity when you're dealing with two characters who are like that, and that he doesn't see the irony in it because he's completely logical. He doesn't have the capacity to understand irony, really, or how that could be funny. And so I went back quite a bit, back and forth on this story, and it took me a while to discover. I think I even have an hour left. I think it was something like an hour 45. I went back and forth with it, trying to pick my way through it, and this is one of the few stories, I believe, that was very nonlinear in the way I wrote it. I didn't get to the end first. A lot of times I'll get to the end, or actually most times I get to the end, and then what I'll do is go back and kind of just fix some things and tweak some lines, but I just wasn't feeling it. I wasn't very happy with it. And so what I did is, about halfway in, 500, 600 words or so, I started going back already, which I don't know. Maybe if I wouldn't have done that, or hadn't have done that, it would have gone smoother. Maybe it would have gone quicker. Maybe I would have just stayed with the original concept. It would have been a slightly different story. I'm not sure, but because I stopped halfway and I said, you know what, I need to, it's really bothering me, because I need to figure out where this is going, or like what the main concept is, because I didn't want to overcomplicate it. As I said, I want it to be a simple story, like most of these are, where it's just a moment of a relationship between this robot and this girl throughout the years. You know, when she starts out as a little girl, and then as she's, you know, a teen or in her 20s, or, you know, an adult anyway. The last conversation they had, and another thing I wanted to do is I decided to not make it end. So what I wanted to have happen is at the very end, and I added this later, is, you know, he's wondering when he's going to see her again. So it's almost as if I'm just capturing a moment in time. And I think that's what all stories are, really. You just take a moment of time and you pull it out of the larger narrative that could be all of the what if, right? And you focus on that, because I think that's what a lot of people get hung up on, is they're trying to tell the story of how did things begin and how did things end, like forever and all of eternity. Whereas I think what you need to do is drill down and find interesting moments between two people or a group of people, and that's it. That's going to tell a much more compelling story. Don't worry so much about world building. I know in the genre of fantasy and science fiction, and so I'll talk about it for a second because this is science fiction. World building is important, but I think that a lot of people hold a little bit too much. They're too concerned with it, and I think it really ruins their story, because a lot of times they spend so much time creating a world and creating all that intricate detail that they feel that it's necessary to make the reader understand and say, look at what I did, look how clever I am, look at all the stuff I came up with. When in actuality, nobody really cares. Everybody cares about characters. They care about the events that happen. The world building is just set dressing. If you're writing a story to write a story, you're talking about, you're trying to evoke emotion. As I always quote Saul Stein on saying, that's the object. It's not to give information, it is to evoke emotion. So whenever you're writing, no matter what it is, fantasy, sci-fi, that, you know, historically may have a lot of world building involved, that is what you want to do. And if you tell a compelling story, then by all means, you know, go nuts with a world building. Just be careful about pushing it on the reader too much. I mean, if you take an author like Tolkien, very elaborate world building. I mean, he has the Silmarillion, which is essentially like the history book of Middle Earth. And what he did is he actually, you know, worked the other way. He created this crazy world, this crazy hyper detailed world, and then he told a story in it, and successfully told a good story that had, you know, evoked emotion. And so that's why it's so successful. And then what happens is because everyone is so interested in these characters and the plight that they went through, that they want to dig deeper. They want to learn more about this world. So start there. Don't start with a world building. Have an idea of what it is, because I really, really worry. And even Asimov, okay, as much as I love Mr. Asimov, one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time, in his Foundation series, he began the books with these massive exposition dumps. And I feel like it worked because it was a book within the book. So it was a book that existed within the world. There are these excerpts. So it's not a terrible idea. I think it would have been better if he started with an immediate scene, something with action, something, you know, like a movie hook, rather than kind of starting with a history lesson. But he was also a scientist and historian, so, you know, I don't completely fault him for that. It's kind of tough, but he was a great fiction writer as well. Who am I to challenge? I think it's all about opinion too, because there's a lot of fantasy and sci-fi readers who love the world building, but I wonder if they would love it as much if it wasn't a good story as well. So I think that honestly, story comes first, world building second in my mind, no matter the genre. I don't care if you're writing epic fantasy. Write compelling characters, write a compelling scenes and narratives, and then it doesn't matter what your world is. I think that, you know, if you want to then dig a little bit deeper and explore some things, but just always tie it back to character. And I know I'm ranting a lot about this, so I will move on and talk a little bit more about this story. So now you can see peppering things. And I really like that line where she said, they're sitting there on the sand, on the dry sand. There's this interesting exchange between these two where he's almost, you know, he has some trepidation with approaching the wet sand. He's not quite sure of it. He's noting all of the strangeness of it, how like it reflects the sky. It takes him a while. She has to literally pull him across the threshold. And so I think that's another opportunity where you can have someone who may be quote unquote less intelligent than someone else educate them. And that's what she was doing here. She was showing her humanity and showing him humanity. The line I was referring to is when she said, "See, this is no fun. There's no memory." And what I was getting at that, if you didn't get that, is drawing in wet sand. You know, it creates these more or less clean lines comparatively to the dry sand, and that was just a callback to his memory and actually, you know, the entire very meta, I guess, to this entire tale. And that's one thing I try to do in stories. And you'll notice that in books or movies that you watch, there's always an interesting line that speaks to the theme or the subject of the story. And that's really when things, I don't know, they really fall into place. It's very powerful stuff that you can create that way, rather than it just be completely narrow. It's almost like breaking down the fourth wall in a way, without, but not being, you know, directly addressing the reader, but it's a way to drive home the theme, or, you know, what you're trying to say as a writer, because I think we're all trying to say something. Theme is extremely important. I don't care what you're writing. If you're writing pulp stuff, I feel like even still, you want some theme in there. If you're writing just trashy romance novels, whatever it may be, I guarantee you it will be better with theme, for all of the reasons that people read more, let's say, quote unquote, entertainment. I think if you have a layer of theme and a layer, you know, of subtext and some kind of message, not preachy, mind you, but just something that has a little bit more substance to it, I feel like the reader is going to appreciate it much more. Even if it's on a subconscious level, they may not directly know why they like it more, or why this book is special, or this story is special, or whatever it is you're making. But that's my philosophy on it. And I know sometimes that seems like artsy fartsy, and a friend of mine who has been struggling with writing, we've written together in the past. I don't want to say quite a bit, but a little bit. And he has a lot of great ideas, but he just struggles with like he's called me before and it's talked about, like, I don't know, I got to figure out the theme. It's like, you know what, man, just come up with an interesting story. Or he's done the opposite. You know, I don't want to tell a story that has a message or has a theme or anything like that. I just want to tell something that's fun. And I'm thinking, like, or, you know, worry about character too much. I want to tell something fun. I'm like, really, anything that's fun, that's memorable, that you want that people will want to read, has all of that stuff. Now, it doesn't have to be super deep or profound, but it should be there. I mean, even something like Indiana Jones, right? It's the character work, and it's great. It's got great themes. It's got all of those things, and it's still you know, I hate the fucking word fun. I hate it when people say, I just want to be entertained. I want something that's fun. I can't stand that, because actually Adam Skelter, with his Anatomy of Story series on YouTube, he has a video called The Art of Entertainment, and he explains that extremely eloquently, how you know, entertaining or fun is kind of a bullshit. It's a bullshit statement. It's because you don't know how to articulate what you find interesting about it. And I highly encourage you to check that out if you have not yet. But here we are, getting to the end. We have our poor little robot. You know, the horseshoe crab is gone. The girl is gone, and he's going to be walking left all alone, looking for horseshoe hoof prints. So full circle, you know how I love it. It kind of ended where it began, except there's one difference. There is somewhat of an arc here, and that is that he crossed the threshold, the metaphorical threshold of the water line, or the boundary between the white sand and the dry sand. So you could say I'm bullshitting you, and that's totally fine. But sometimes that stuff just happens, I think, and it's great when it does. And then you can read it back, and you can put those pieces together and find some meaning in what you're trying to do. Because whether or not you consciously intended for it, if your mind connects the dots and you create something, why can't that be real? And that's what I love about storytelling. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. So let's talk a little bit more about this story. And if you listen to my analysis, my read over of the story while I was writing it, you'll know that I went on a bit of a rant about world building. So I would like to retract a little bit of what I said. I do understand that world building is very important. They make the characters feel more alive. They make the world feel more alive. They make it feel like it just could exist. However, I will stand by my claim that character is more important. So never forget that. Yes, you want these characters to live in a world that feels real, that feels like it could just come off the page and exist in parallel to maybe the world you live in. But without solid characters, without compelling narratives and great conflict, that world means nothing. So hopefully that clears things up, or if I said some things in there you disagree with, let me know in the comments because I'd really like to know. I know a lot of fantasy readers and science fiction readers really appreciate world building. And, I do too, but without compelling characters or a compelling narrative, I don't care. No one cares about the world. No one really cares about the plot unless you care about the characters. I'm looking at you, Dune. Oh, I know. Shots fired, right? I'm about to get all the Frank Herbert zealots after me, but that's okay. I read Dune recently, again, maybe a year or two ago, and while I completely appreciate the world building, the character work and the plot were just, I don't know how to put it, boring as hell. I don't know. But anyway, all right, well, let's talk about this story right after I completely shit on one of the most well-respected science fiction properties of all time. So here we go. I'll talk about my little 1,000 word short story here. Anyway, I think from a craft perspective, what I got out of this, and I was questioning myself while I was writing it, is communication, or making sure the reader knows what the hell is going on in your scene. Let's call it that. My official definition. Anyway, I was struggling with it because I wanted to create a system in which the reader knew exactly what was going on in terms of time jumps. And I've done this before in other stories where I feel like it was a little bit more clear. And here I went with it because I wanted to be inside of the head of the robot. And in hindsight, I probably should have written the narrative a little bit more in that perspective. I think I did here and there, but other times maybe I got a little bit too poetic for a robot. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. In hindsight, I'm glad that I went with the more confusing nature because I like the idea of this girl that he knew for so many years just kind of coming into and out of existence while he's on this beach. The experiences he's having in the present are mirrored against experiences he's had in the past. And I really like that idea because we tend to think of stories as chronological, right? You're moving in one direction, and flashbacks are a no-no a lot in writing. So, you always want to tell the story in a forward way, always having momentum, always building, moving on, making it very immediate. But I thought, what if immediacy was perceived in a flashback or flashbacks? And that's what I tried to do here, or at least now that I'm thinking out loud, that's what I'm telling you I tried to do here. Is I always want to create a very visual story, very light on exposition. Anyway, I want you to see the story unfolding before your eyes as you read it. And even though I was going back in time and then back to the present, ping-ponging, I guess, throughout the entire thing, hopefully it felt like this robot was constantly moving closer to the water. That's what I was trying to do. I literally had him start on the dunes near the back of the beach and then move his way forward, crossing that threshold of where the water washes up onto the shore to be the moment where his arc takes place, so to speak. And speaking of arcs, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but maybe the ending, maybe the last line should have been something different. Maybe the robot should have come to the conclusion that he's never going to see this girl again, and that would end his fascination with finding these hoof prints. I didn't go that way. We'll see how I feel about it when I get to edit before publication, but that's just another thought that went through my mind because while I was talking about the writing during the analysis, I talked about arcs, and I think there's an arc here. I don't know that I fully hammered that arc home though with the last line, but that is what rewriting is for. I'll revisit this later down the road and see how I feel about it. Those are my thoughts on the story. It's about communication, making it a bit jarring for the sake of effect, and hopefully, I didn't lose the reader. That's the goal. Hopefully, I made this jarring, possibly, or confusing experience still enjoyable and still compelling enough for the reader to get to the end and have a satisfying experience, because that's all we want. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the story. And if you like this video, consider giving me a like and subscribe if you like story related content, as well as check out my books. I have a new one called Forged of Ice and Blood. It is a fantasy adventure, as well as my dark coming-of-age tale called The Field. Come hang out with me on my Discord, where we talk about story. If you're an artist, a writer, a musician, whatever it may be, all creatives are welcome, and we have a good time. I stream as well on Saturdays and Sundays, most Saturdays and Sundays between about 5 and 6 p.m. Well, I will end this with another request, is that if you have not read any Asimov, please do. Do yourself a favor. Read some good sci-fi, some classic sci-fi. Stuff like this just isn't written anymore. That's all I'm saying. And if you're still here, I'll tell you a little funny anecdote, is that Isaac Asimov actually got me back into reading. I loved it as a young child, and then for whatever reason, I think from the grades of maybe like 4th grade all the way up until I was a senior in high school, as much as I wanted to enjoy reading, I just couldn't find anything. I love fantasy. I'm a big, Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing game fan, so I was still doing that. But finding fiction that really enthralled me was difficult. And the book that really brought me back, other than John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, was Prelude to Foundation, the prequel to the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. So anyway, for those of you who hung out this far with me, there you go. I didn't read for a very long time, or very consistently anyway. So on that note, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.